I'm Julia Harmon, 30 years old, and ever since my spinal surgery crutches have been the only thing keeping me upright. I've learned to live with the pain, but not with the doubt, the way my own family watches me like they're waiting for proof that I'm exaggerating. Tonight at my mother's birthday dinner in a high-end restaurant, I told myself I could survive one evening of pretending everything was fine. I should have known better. The moment I pushed my chair back to go to the restroom, I felt that familiar tension eyes tracking my every move, the unspoken suspicion hanging in the air thicker than the expensive perfume around the table. I tried to ignore it. I tried to walk away with what dignity I had left. And then it happened. My brother stepped behind me, ripped my crutch out of my hand, and barked at me with a disgust I will never forget. "Stop pretending you're useless." I didn't even have time to catch myself. My knee buckled, my hand hit the floor, and a sharp pain shot up my spine. But the sound that cut the deepest wasn't the impact, it was the laughter. Actual laughter. People who share my last name chuckling while I struggled on the ground because they thought I'd finally been caught. For a second, the humiliation felt endless. And then, the room shifted. Conversations stopped. Chairs froze mid-movement. A shadow moved into the doorway, someone who had seen more of my medical reality than any of them ever cared to know. A hand landed firmly on my brother's shoulder. I looked up, still on the floor, and the only thing I could think was that whatever happened next would change everything. 5 words were coming, and they were about to end him. If you've ever been doubted by the people who should have protected you, don't go anywhere. What happened after those 5 words is something no one at that table was ready for. Subscribe, so you don't miss part 2. The room didn't breathe for several seconds after that hand landed on my brother's shoulder. Then, Dr. Lillian Hayes stepped forward, her voice steady enough to silence every fork, every whisper, every nervous shuffle. I operated on her spine. 5 simple words delivered with the weight of a gavel. A shockwave rippled through the table. Guests stiffened. One of the servers froze mid-step with a tray of flutes balanced in his hands, unsure whether to continue into the room or retreat. It was the kind of silence that doesn't ask for attention, it demands it. Valerie finally broke it. She leaned back with a smirk that didn't belong in a room full of adults and said, "Doctors can be fooled too." She didn't just say it. She tossed it out like a casual insult, like undermining a surgeon's credibility was some sort of party trick. The arrogance in her expression made several people look away, as if secondhand embarrassment was too much to bear. But Valerie hadn't felt shame a day in her life. Dr. Hayes didn't acknowledge her. She simply moved her hand away from Blake's shoulder and stepped between us, forcing him to back up. Blake's jaw tightened. He glanced around quickly, trying to see who had been watching him. "She walks around the house without those things, all the time," he muttered, gesturing at my crutches like they were props from a high school play. His voice carried that mix of frustration and fear people get when they realize the lie they've built, their whole attitude around, might be collapsing. My mother Deborah sat at the far end of the table, her face pale, her eyes darting toward the staff lingering near the doorway. She wasn't looking at me. She wasn't looking at Dr. Hayes. She was looking at the witnesses. Her biggest concern wasn't the truth. It was that strangers in a restaurant might see her family fall apart in real time. The realization stung in a way I wasn't ready for. The restaurant manager, trying to stay discreet, positioned himself near the wall with his hands clasped, pretending to monitor service while clearly monitoring us. A few servers hovered beside him, unsure whether stepping closer would escalate or help. Their expressions said they'd seen arguments before, but nothing like this. I felt Erin move beside me, lowering herself carefully to my level. She had her phone in hand, not raised, but prepared. Erin wasn't reckless or dramatic. She was practical. When people tried to rewrite history, she made sure they didn't get the chance. She placed a hand gently on my shoulder, steady but unobtrusive, keeping close enough to support me without obstructing the woman who knew exactly what she was doing. Dr. Hayes crouched with practiced precision, her expression shifting from authority to clinical focus in seconds. "Julia, stay still," she instructed, her tone calm but firm. Then she lifted her head and addressed the room without raising her voice. Yet somehow her words were louder than anything said that night. "I need everyone to move back and give me space." Chairs slid across the floor in a disorganized chorus. Even Blake stepped back, though his reluctance radiated from him like heat off asphalt. Valerie moved too, but not without rolling her eyes as if medical expertise was personally inconvenient. Deborah stayed seated, gripping her napkin in her lap like it was a lifeline. The circle widened around us, leaving me and Dr. Hayes at the center of an unwilling audience. She checked the angle of my legs, the pressure on my wrists, the alignment of my spine. Her movements were efficient, deliberate, shaped by years of seeing bodies fail and recover. She asked a few questions, short, precise, no wasted breath, and I answered quietly, trying to focus on her voice, rather than the dozen stares pressing against my back. Blake hovered near the edge of the open space, pacing in short steps, running a hand through his hair like he wanted to pull the frustration out by the roots. Valerie's attention drifted from me to the staff and back again, annoyed she wasn't the center of the spectacle anymore. Deborah alternated between dabbing her forehead and stealing looks at the hallway, terrified someone she knew might walk by. And in the middle of that uncomfortable clearing, surrounded by people who should have protected me but chose humiliation instead, something inside me sharpened. Hearing Valerie say that, it was a different kind of hurt. Not the kind that hits your body, but the kind that shows someone never wanted to believe you in the first place. When the tension settled just enough for movement to feel possible again, two servers stepped into the room with a birthday cake glowing under soft candlelight. They hesitated when they saw the atmosphere, every face tight, every breath held. Their rehearsed happy birthday introduction faltered, and instead they placed the cake quietly at the center of the table, trying not to disrupt whatever argument they had walked into. The candles flickered beside my mother, but she didn't lean forward, didn't smile, didn't even acknowledge the moment meant for her. The celebration was gone before it had a chance to begin. Dr. Lillian Hayes didn't wait for anyone. She pulled out her phone with a precision that felt almost surgical, tapped the screen, and turned it toward the table. "Since there's still denial," she said, her tone controlled, "you're going to see what I see." The first video played instantly. It was me sweating, trembling, gripping the parallel bars in her clinic as I forced each step forward. My left foot dragged slightly, my arms shook, and my face showed every ounce of effort it took just to stay upright. She swiped again, revealing my MRI scan with the hardware visible along my spine. "This is her post-surgery imaging. The injury is documented, not imagined." A few relatives leaned closer, unable to look away. Blake's expression shifted slowly from irritation to something more uncertain. Valerie crossed her arms with a look that dared anyone to expect humility. Ethan was the first to speak, pushing himself upright with false confidence. "Videos can be edited," he said, trying to sound unbothered, even though his voice betrayed him. "Anyone can make it look convincing." His attempt carried an edge of panic, the kind that comes from watching excuses fall apart. Erin lifted her phone beside me, holding it steady without making herself the focus. She wasn't dramatic, just deliberate. She captured every stare, every reaction, every careless word that someone would later pretend they never said. The quiet determination in her face made it clear she understood exactly how moments like this get rewritten. The restaurant manager approached, wearing a polite but strained smile. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "but I need everyone to keep things calm for the other guests." His voice was professional, but the tension behind it suggested he'd already decided to intervene if things escalated further. Dr. Hayes nodded once. "We're almost finished here." She turned back to the table, her expression unwavering. "These files are real. The evidence is in front of you. What you choose to believe after this is your responsibility." She didn't raise her voice yet, her words filled the space like a spotlight no one could escape. My chest tightened. The chair under me felt suddenly small and foreign. I steadied myself with one hand on the table and reached for my crutches. The ache in my lower back reminded me how long I'd been sitting there trying to pretend the humiliation didn't hurt. "I'm leaving," I said quietly. The sentence wasn't loud, but it cut through the murmurs with absolute clarity. Blake stared at the cake, avoiding my eyes. Valerie exhaled sharply, unimpressed. Ethan looked at his hands as if waiting for someone else to speak, but no one tried to stop me. No one stepped in front of me. No one asked me to stay. Deborah half rose from her chair, torn between instinct and appearance. For a moment it looked like she might walk toward me. But then her attention drifted to the guests, glancing over, and hesitation anchored her back in place. She pressed her napkin into her lap and lowered her gaze, choosing silence over discomfort. I adjusted my grip on my crutches, and Aaron moved beside me without needing a word. The room felt colder as I walked toward the exit, each step measured but certain. The buzz of the dining area muted behind me, leaving only the quiet resolve settling in my chest. I didn't turn back. Not toward the candles, not toward the table, and not toward anyone who had spent years convincing themselves that doubt was easier than compassion. By the time Aaron and I stepped into my apartment that night, the air felt different, still dense, almost waiting for me to react to everything I had held in through the ride home. I locked the door, leaned my crutches against the wall, and sank carefully onto the couch. Erin placed her keys on the counter and sat across from me, watching with that quiet patience she always saved for moments when she knew words would only get in the way. The living room lamps cast a soft glow that made the silence feel sharper, as if the room itself understood something irreversible had happened. After a long breath, I picked up my phone. My fingers hovered for a moment before I finally opened the video. The screen lit up with Aaron's recording the confrontation, the disbelief, the expressions that had cut deeper than anything physically painful. It was all there, the dismissive glances, the tension in Blake's posture, the way Valerie leaned back, like she was enjoying a show. Watching it without the noise of the restaurant made every detail feel amplified. Erin kept her eyes on me, not the footage, reading the way my jaw tightened each time someone in the video spoke over my reality. A new notification appeared. It was an email from Dr. Hayes. I opened it immediately. She had attached updated imaging reports, a detailed summary of my spinal condition, and a brief but heartfelt note at the bottom. "If you need formal documentation, a statement, or testimony, I'm available. Don't hesitate to reach out. You deserve support." The certainty in her words steadied something inside me, something that had been shaking for far too long. Before I could finish reading, my phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Deborah. "Did you get home?" No warmth. No recognition of what had unfolded. No acknowledgement of the humiliation I endured. Just a logistical question, the kind you send when you feel obligated, not concerned. Erin leaned over slightly, read the text, and let out a quiet breath. "That's it?" she asked, her voice low but edged with disbelief. After everything I didn't answer, I didn't need to. Erin shifted to the edge of her seat, elbows on her knees, looking straight at me. "Julia, you need to report what happened. This isn't about exaggerating things or making it dramatic. It's about safety and respect. Blake grabbed your crutch and risked your stability. They attacked your integrity in public. You can't keep letting them rewrite what's real." Her tone wasn't harsh. It was steady, grounded. She wasn't pushing me. She was reminding me of the truth. I looked back at the paused video on my screen. My own image stared back at me, eyes wide, body tense, caught between pain and disbelief. The clarity of it stripped away the excuses I had spent years making for people who didn't deserve them. Erin reached out and rested her hand gently on mine. "If you stay silent," she said softly, "you're telling them it's okay to treat you like this. And it's not." My chest tightened as I unlocked my phone again and scrolled through Dr. Hayes's attachments. Each document was another brick in a wall of evidence I had never intended to gather, but now felt grateful to have. None of it could be dismissed. Not by Blake, not by Valerie, not by anyone who claimed to love me while doubting every word I said. Another message from Deborah appeared. Answer me. Still no hint of care, still no acknowledgement of what had actually happened. Just insistent, sharp, cold, familiar. Erin saw the screen light up again and shook her head slowly. Not judgmental, just saddened by the pattern she'd witnessed for years. I typed a reply, deleted it, tried again, and deleted that too. It took several breaths for the words to come into focus, not dramatic, not emotional, just honest. I need time. And distance. Please don't contact me for a while. I stared at the sentence before pressing send. When the message delivered, something inside me loosened like the first exhale after holding my breath through an entire storm. Erin didn't say anything immediately. She sat back, giving me space to feel whatever came next. The apartment was quiet, but for once the quiet didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like the beginning of room to think, room to breathe, room to finally choose myself. The day after the dinner began with an unusual stillness, the kind that almost fooled me into thinking everything might settle on its own, but that hope dissolved the moment Erin stepped closer, with her phone pressed tightly in her hand and worry shaping her voice. She told me she had shared the video in a private support group late the previous night, just a safe space for people who dealt with difficult family issues, and she hadn't expected anything beyond a few sympathetic replies. What she didn't know was that someone inside the group forwarded the video to a friend, and that friend passed it to another until the clip drifted into corners of the internet we didn't recognize. I watched her expression shift as she scrolled through her messages, each new notification pulling her deeper into the realization that the situation had grown far beyond the bubble she intended. Before either of us fully absorbed the spread, Erin received another message from a coworker who recognized Blake's voice in the recording. That coworker worked in the same building as him and didn't hesitate to send the video directly to HR, explaining that they had concerns about his conduct toward a disabled family member. Erin read the message out loud, her voice threading between disbelief and a quiet anger on my behalf. Then Blake started calling me. The first call went unanswered. The second came faster, then a third. When I still didn't pick up, the texts started pouring in. None asked if I was okay. None acknowledged what he'd done. Every message circled around the same accusation that I had set him up. He wrote that I had embarrassed him in front of the entire company, that I had turned everyone against him, and that I was responsible for whatever happened next. His desperation only grew after HR emailed him requesting an immediate meeting. Erin leaned forward and whispered, "He's terrified of accountability. That's all this is." She wasn't wrong. Another contact of hers, someone who occasionally interacted with Blake at work, sent a quick update saying the situation wasn't being dismissed as simple family drama. HR had used the phrase behavior inconsistent with company values, which in corporate language is a warning that lands like a strike on a permanent record. Valerie wasn't spared either. Word traveled quickly through her church community, a place where reputations carried weight and judgment spread in whispers that never really disappeared. Several members reached out to her privately asking whether the video was real. Others confronted her directly in group chats, questioning how she could stand there and mock someone struggling to stay upright. Erin showed me a screenshot she had been sent, a brief post shared among church members. "Kindness is free. Cruelty leaves receipts." Valerie fired back at the critics with the same stubborn defiance she had shown the night before, insisting the clip lacked context, insisting people didn't understand the family dynamic, insisting she had been unfairly targeted. But no explanation she attempted managed to soften how she looked in the recording. Later that afternoon, an unfamiliar number called my phone. I nearly let it ring out, but something told me to answer. Ms. Harmon, a calm voice, said, "This is Officer Cole with the Denver Police Department. I'd like to speak with you regarding an incident that was reported involving you at a restaurant last night." His tone wasn't confrontational or skeptical. It was steady in a way that grounded the moment instead of escalating it. He explained that he'd been sent a copy of the video and needed additional evidence as well as my account. Erin was already opening her laptop before he finished speaking. She organized the files with efficient focus, first the recording, then the medical reports Dr. Hayes had emailed, then the imaging, and, finally, the written summary detailing why I still required mobility assistance. We uploaded everything to the secure link Officer Cole provided while he stayed on the line, asking brief, direct questions only when necessary. He thanked me for the cooperation and promised a follow-up once the case was formally logged, and when the call ended, the room felt heavier and lighter at the same time. The consequences had begun unfolding on their own, not because I pushed for revenge or attention, but because the truth had finally landed in places where it could no longer be ignored. The day after the police call, there was a heaviness in the air that felt strangely clarifying, as if everything that had been pushed aside for years was finally demanding space. I scheduled a meeting with attorney Claire Benton and walked into her office with a mixture of exhaustion and purpose. Claire had the kind of presence that steadied the room instantly. Her voice was level, her posture composed, and she listened with full attention as I explained what had happened. When I showed her the video, the medical records, and the email from Dr. Hayes, she studied each document with a sharp focus that made me feel protected rather than scrutinized. She told me plainly that what had been done to me qualified as emotional harassment. It wasn't ambiguous or open to interpretation. It was documented mistreatment supported by medical proof. She pointed out that cases like mine rarely came with such clear evidence, and she emphasized that taking action wasn't vindictive, it was necessary to stop a pattern that could otherwise continue indefinitely. She recommended beginning with formal legal warning letters addressed to Blake and Valerie. The letters would outline the legal consequences of any further intimidation, public misrepresentation, or attempts to contact me in ways that undermined my well-being. Claire made sure I understood that these letters were not threats, they were boundaries backed by law. I agreed without hesitation. She drafted the letters immediately, shaping every sentence with precision, and told me they would be delivered that same afternoon. As I left her office, I carried a sense of stability I hadn't felt in a long time. On the ride home, Erin called and urged me to join the chronic pain support group she attended. I wasn't sure I wanted to talk about myself in front of strangers, but she insisted it wasn't a place where people complained, it was a space where people understood. That evening, I logged in quietly, planning only to listen, yet the longer I stayed, the more I felt a kind of recognition that loosened something in my chest. People spoke about the invisible negotiations their bodies forced them into, about being doubted by the people closest to them, about the emotional toll of constantly proving what pain already made undeniable. Their words aligned so closely with my experience that I found myself turning on my camera and introducing who I was. The response was immediate and warm, and one member mentioned her company was hiring for remote positions that didn't require physical commuting. The idea of financial independence, of not having to rely on anyone who doubted or diminished me, resonated deeper than I expected. I applied that same night, realizing that moving forward meant building a life where stability didn't depend on the approval of people who refused to see me clearly. Later, after the support meeting ended, I sat on the couch and noticed a voicemail notification from Deborah. For a moment, I debated ignoring it entirely, but curiosity tugged at me. Her message began in a tone that pretended calm, the kind she used whenever she wanted to avoid responsibility while still exerting control. She mentioned the video, said the situation had gotten bigger than it needed to, and insisted that family matters shouldn't involve outsiders. She said it was unfortunate that things had escalated and suggested that I should have kept everything within the household instead of letting it become an issue everyone talks about. There was no concern for my well-being, no acknowledgement of what I endured, no recognition of Blake or Valerie's actions. Her focus was entirely on appearances, reputation, and the inconvenience my pain had caused her image. Listening to the message felt like watching a familiar doorway close one final time. But instead of shrinking the way I used to, I felt something clear and grounded rise inside me. With Claire's support, the group's understanding, and the steps I was taking to rebuild my independence, I finally saw how much I had bent myself to fit into a version of family that had never made room for me. I replayed the voicemail once, not because I needed to hear it again, but to confirm the decision forming in my mind. When it ended, I pressed delete without hesitation. There was no shaking, no guilt, no need to justify anything to myself. The boundary I set wasn't symbolic or temporary. It was the first real act of protecting my own life, and for the first time, I didn't apologize for it. A few days later, when I walked into the physical therapy center for my scheduled session, the steadiness of the room gave me a small sense of control I hadn't felt in a long time. The low rumble of treadmills, the soft clatter of weights, and the rhythmic instructions from the therapists formed a kind of background that let me focus only on my steps. I was adjusting my grip on the parallel bars, preparing for the walking drills, when a faint reflection in the glass panel caught my attention. Blake stood at the doorway wearing a volunteer badge that looked stiff and out of place on his shirt, the kind HR assigns when they want to monitor reform. He hesitated before stepping inside, as if waiting for permission that never came. I didn't greet him. I simply shifted my stance and continued my routine, hoping he'd understand this wasn't the place for him. But Blake moved toward me with a smile so forced it nearly cracked at the edges. Without waiting for acknowledgement, he launched into a stream of explanations that had nothing to do with me. He complained about HR's overreaction, about how people at work were now treating him differently, about how this whole thing had messed up weeks of progress. Every sentence revolved around his discomfort, as if he were the one recovering from surgery, as if the only injury worth discussing was the bruise to his reputation. He mentioned his mandatory volunteer hours, rolling his eyes at the idea that he needed supervision to prove he was a good person. He talked about how humiliating it felt to explain the situation to his supervisor. He mentioned colleagues whispering. He talked about the consequences like they were tragedies. Not once did he ask how I was doing. Not once did he acknowledge the pain he caused or the seriousness of what happened at the restaurant. His version of an apology was a self-centered monologue about everything he had lost because of his own actions. He wasn't seeking forgiveness. He was seeking an ally to help him rewrite the story. When he paused long enough to look at me expectantly like I was supposed to console him, I realized he still didn't understand that the part of me that used to soften for him no longer existed. He waited for me to reassure him that things weren't that bad the way I used to. Instead, I stepped away from the bars and faced him fully. He looked relieved, almost convinced he had reached a breakthrough until I spoke. "You want closure for yourself? I want distance for myself." The sentence settled between us with a finality he hadn't anticipated. Blake blinked, searching for a comeback, but nothing he said could bend the moment back in his favor. He muttered a weak defense about misunderstandings and pressure, but his excuses hung in the air without connection to anything real. A nearby therapist subtly stepped closer, not confrontational, just present enough to remind Blake that this was a medical setting, not a stage for emotional negotiations. Blake tugged at his badge again, pretending he had volunteer responsibilities waiting, though it was clear he had come only to salvage whatever image he thought could still be saved. He lingered near the doorway for a few seconds, as if expecting a softening, a call of his name, something that implied the relationship still had threads to pull. I turned back to my walking drill, lifted my foot, and placed it forward. That small motion was enough to dismiss him. He finally stepped out, leaving behind a silence that felt more like fresh air than emptiness. After the session ended, I walked through the corridor with a clarity that hummed through every part of me. My steps weren't perfect, but they were mind-steady, intentional, and separate from the grasp of anyone who had ever tried to shrink me. And as I reached the exit, the truth unfolded inside me with a quiet certainty that didn't require permission or validation. Walking out of that room, I finally understood something. Some relationships don't break, they just reveal what they've always been. And once you see them clearly, you don't go back. A month later, I packed up my apartment and moved to a different city where no one knew my last name, my family, or the weight I had carried for years. The decision didn't come from anger. It came from exhaustion from accepting that healing couldn't happen in the same place where the damage kept repeating. Erin helped me load the last box into her car, hugged me tight, and reminded me that starting over wasn't running, it was choosing a new direction. When she drove away, I stood in front of my new building with my crutches in hand and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time, a clean beginning. The apartment was small, quiet, and filled with nothing but my own things. No voices judging how I moved, no footsteps pacing outside my bedroom, no pressure to perform a version of myself that fit someone else's narrative. I placed my medical files in a drawer, hung my coat in the closet, and let the silence settle. It didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. I registered with a local physical therapy clinic a few blocks away and met my new therapist, Paige, during my first week there. She reviewed my chart, looked at me with calm, steady eyes, and said, "Your recovery belongs to you. We'll move at the pace that keeps you safe and strong." Those words alone almost made me cry, not because they were dramatic, but because they were simple. Respect shouldn't have felt revolutionary, but it did. Cutting contact with Blake was straightforward. There were no long texts, no emotional phone calls, no explanations. I blocked his number and email, removed him from my emergency contacts, and deleted the voicemail notifications without listening. There was nothing he could say that would undo the harm he had chosen, again and again. Distance wasn't revenge. It was a boundary I should have set years ago. With Mom, I kept things functional. If she asked something necessary, I responded. If she asked something emotional, I let the message sit until it disappeared into the background. She didn't push, but she didn't truly understand either. Maybe she tried in her own way. Maybe she avoided the truth because it was easier, but either way, I couldn't give her the closeness she wanted. Not now. My father never reached out. His silence had always been his contribution to the family dynamic, and moving cities didn't change that. I no longer felt the familiar ache from it. A person can't abandon what they never truly held. Slowly, I built a new version of my life. I joined a private online support group for people living with chronic pain, and for the first time, I felt like I was speaking to people who heard me without suspicion. Their stories reflected mine in ways my own family never acknowledged. When I finally shared my experience, the messages that followed weren't pity or disbelief. They were validation, understanding, and quiet strength from people who knew exactly what it felt like to be doubted by the people you loved the most. One morning, I found a long email from Mom waiting in my inbox. It was the kind of message that must have taken hours for her to write: careful sentences, emotional confessions, apologies folded between explanations. She said she regretted not standing up for me, not questioning Blake, not seeing the truth when it was right in front of her. She hoped one day we could rebuild. I read it once, then again. Then I closed my laptop and let the message sit unanswered. Forgiveness didn't need an audience, and I wasn't ready to offer connection simply because she regretted the past. My remote job made it easier to focus on myself. I worked in quiet cafes on my balcony or from my couch, with a heating pad resting over my spine. My life grew smaller in the best way: smaller circles, smaller expectations, smaller wounds. There was room to breathe now. And in that breathing room, I realized something important: leaving wasn't the painful part. Staying had been. People like to say that family is everything, that blood comes first, that loyalty means endurance. But the truth is far less romantic. Boundaries matter even when they separate you from the people who raised you. A family home isn't automatically a safe place. Sometimes it's simply the first place you learn to survive. And leaving, really leaving, can be the only path toward living instead of enduring. I didn't move to punish anyone. I didn't want closure or apologies or redemption arcs. I wanted peace. I wanted space to grow without being pulled back into old patterns. And now, when I wake up in my quiet apartment, when I walk into therapy with confidence instead of shame, when I join my support group and feel understood, I know I made the right choice. Some relationships don't end, they reveal themselves. And once you see them clearly, you can finally choose yourself. That's the lesson I want to leave you with. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to protect your own life. You're allowed to choose peace over blood. It's not selfish, it's survival. Thank you all for taking the time to watch the video. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any upcoming videos.